let's go into that story called The Butcher, which actually captures this whole flavor in a very ironic way. It's a lovely story, and it also deals with, you know, romance and that theme as well a little bit. But it's really a very fascinating little jewel in this collection. So if I could request you perhaps to read that out. It's
The Butcher?
Yes, please.
Okay. Yeah, it's a much shorter story, so I'll request your patience on that. But it is true that it is a story firstly set much after the partition, in which the impact of partition still lingers. So this is in normal times. When I stepped into the drawing room, I sensed a strange tension in the air. It occurred to me then that the tension was radiating from the faces of the guests and had invaded the entire atmosphere. Their faces seemed to say, "We are tired of looking around. There is no girl who can match our very handsome son. We are ready for yet another disappointment today." The boy was truly handsome, one in a million. "This is my elder brother," Tripath introduced me to the guests. When we were in Tanzania, he was Niti's local guardian in Delhi. And we don't take any decisions in our family without his agreement. The boy's father gave me a cold look. I took no notice because I was staring at the boy. Beauty has always been my weakness, whether in a man or a woman. We too had searched far and wide for a match for Niti, but had not found anyone suitable. When she walked in from the bedroom door, it seemed as though the moon itself had come in through the open window. Dressed in jeans and a cream blouse, she was quite a picture. The life on her face, the cut of her features, her eyes, as if someone had dissolved the golden sun in sapphire waters. The listless faces of the guests lit up with sudden interest. The boy's face turned dark red. His eyes took on a dreamy look. "This is our Niti," I said. "Her name is Navneet. We just like to call her Niti. An innocent girl, without any guile, not at all like her nickname." Niti looked at me with sweet reproach and said, "Uncle, there you go again, starting already." Her voice, as bright as the sound of tinkling silver bells, further shook the guests. They had been staring fixedly at her. Now their eyes shone with joy. "Oh yes," I continued, "she's now doing her Masters in Literature from St. Stephen's College. She topped her BA honours with a first class. Keats and T.S. Eliot are her favourite poets, and in Punjabi she worships Mohan Singh." The guests, who till then had been sitting uncomfortably on the edge of their chairs and formally looking away from the dishes on the table loaded with sweets, now settled back comfortably and began to fill their plates merrily. Their happiness was unbounded. They chirped with glee. And every time they stole a look at Niti, a new lilt would enter their voices. A beautiful face and sharp features can overwhelm anybody, and you are no exceptions, I thought. But all I said was, "Please try those sweets, a new kind called Pakiza." "And our boy," the boy's mother was telling Tripath, "says that he wants a very simple wedding. No ceremonies, no dowry, but the girl should be exceptionally beautiful." The boy looked down, trying to hide his face in his plate of sweets. "Of course, my dear sister," the boy's mother continued with a proprietary tone in her voice. "What's the use of material things in the long run? But her daughter-in-law should be such that if she sits in the kitchen, her light emanates all the way to the courtyard." With that, she threw an enveloping look towards Niti. I don't want to give the impression that only the guests were happy. We too were very agreeable to the match. Tripath's bright and unworried face bore witness to her happiness, and my silent brother-in-law, who could write long sentences on the files in his ministry, but couldn't string together 2 sentences of small talk, couldn't hide his happiness either. We had waited and looked for a long time, but at last it seemed that we had reached our destination. The boy's mother was hugging Tripath. The boy and Niti were surreptitiously examining each other, and the boy's father was relating stories about his department to me now. He had sloughed off his cold behavior like an old skin, and now he was warm and voluble. Matters soon came to such a pass that instead of waiting for us to fill their plates, they began to fill ours. Extending the plate of rasgullas towards me, the boy's father said, "Here, please have these rasgullas. They are very good." "Seeing you, I recall a Bengali joke," he continued. There were two Bengali babus eating rasgullas. He began to laugh at the thought of the rest of the joke, an uncontrolled wild laughter. As he laughed, tears began to stream from his eyes. His brown pupils became golden. His pale cheeks began to shine like seashells, and an overlapped tooth in his lower jaw revealed itself. A memory flashed across my mind. In October 1947, I had accompanied an army convoy from Delhi to Amritsar. The government had established a new army organization charged with rescuing Hindus and Sikhs from newly formed Pakistan. This organization had its headquarters in Amritsar. My parents and siblings were in Rawalpindi. I wanted to reach Amritsar and do my best to get them out. There were no trains or buses running to Amritsar because of the riots. After someone used a bit of influence, I was allowed to travel with the army convoy. There was another man besides the driver in the truck I was traveling in, a handsome young man who laughed at the drop of a hat. His laughter had brightness, it had life. I was transfixed. When he laughed, tears would stream from his eyes, his brown pupils would become golden, his pale cheeks would begin to shine like seashells, and the overlapped tooth in his lower jaw would reveal itself. The convoy had suddenly stopped somewhere between Ludhiana and Jalandhar. There was a great commotion in the fields besides the road. Some men, staves in hand, were searching the field as if for some hunted animal. One of them held a sword. Then I saw a poor-looking Muslim step out of the field. He tried to run, but he was frozen with fear and couldn't move. The next moment, the sword was poised above his head like death itself. He fell at the feet of the man holding the sword and begged, "For the sake of the Guru or Sardar, have mercy on me. I have young children." It seemed as if he would die of fear itself. The man with the sword hesitated, and I thought his soul had rebelled against the evil deed. "Go, run away," he told the unfortunate man, pushing him away from his legs. In the same moment, I saw that the face of the young man with me in the truck had turned bright red, like superheated iron. In an instant, he jumped out of the truck, pulled the sword out of the other man's hand, and cut the poor Muslim to pieces. Returning to his seat in the truck, he said, "Last March, these cruel people killed 8 of my family members in Kahuta." The boy's mother was telling Tripat, "Let's not fiddle about. We should fix the wedding straight away. Long engagements are no longer the custom. We are fortunate that we have met people who are just like our family, gentle people." The boy's father was nodding firmly in agreement, testifying to his family's gentleness. But a fire had erupted inside me, and I screamed out, "You, gentle people, I have known you for years. You are butchers, murderers. Get out of here. We won't give our lovely daughter to butchers." Thank you.
That's also a very interesting story because, as you said, it's set in seemingly normal times, but very much with the partition hanging heavily over people's minds, and in fact influencing what happens in the future as well. So it's actually a very interesting story because not only is this the story of the uncle who's remembering seeing this man in a completely different context about to kill someone who's very, very vulnerable simply because they're a Muslim, but we're also seeing this strange dynamic between this young couple, who are possibly attracted to each other and possibly poised towards, entering into a relationship which is immediately cut by the uncle. So there's a tension there between two generations of people who are, each impacted by the partition. And it's quite interesting because you are then, translating your father's story. from Punjabi into English. So if you could explain a little bit about your view on the generational impact that Partition had.
Yeah, that's really a very, very interesting question, because I think the generational aspects of Partition are still being worked out. In the sense that, you know, there was clearly that generation which had suffered, and they reacted in different ways. But what I remember from our families is all of them yearned for what they had left behind. I mean, there's a story in this book called A New Taj Mahal which depicts that yearning. My father yearned all his life for his books. He left this whole bookshelves of nice leather-bound English classics which he had picked up from somewhere, and he kept talking about them for years. He kept talking about, I mean, all our family kept talking about the fruit of Rawalpindi, the abo hawa of Rawalpindi, the water of Rawalpindi, everything was just fantastic. And, but they didn't ever go back because they were also scared. They were scared of seeing what they may have lost. Some people were brave, some people have gone back and tried to find their houses, some people just left it as hallowed ground in their imagination. The next generation, our generation, had heard all these. We haven't seen it firsthand. So our interest is more academic. It's more intellectual. I went back to Pakistan, but I went and I searched. I searched for where my father stayed and where my grandfather was hidden for several days after 15th of August, and my uncle, and then how they managed to escape and come away. So I tried to trace back all those things, but our interest is more, trying to see what your parents came out of, what your roots were, it's more academic. But theirs was more visceral. It was more emotional. It was yearning. It was fear. It was a deep sense of loss. So I think these are things which are still being worked out, and only time will work these out. And that is why I think some of them should not be worked out, frankly. Because...
But how do you mean?
I mean that some of them should not be worked out because I find the next generation, our children, know very little about Partition. Why? Because what has been written about Partition in English is what they read. So if they've read Midnight's Children, it's Partition for them, Or okay, a bit more, maybe Shadowlines has been written on the partition of Bengal. So if they read Shadowlines, they know something about it. But most of the next generation is not reading the original Punjab partition written in Punjabi or Urdu, for that matter, on the Pakistani side. So there is a need to remind, not to keep hate alive, but to keep a sense of history. I always compare it, I spent 4 years in Israel, and I'm no longer the ambassador there despite what the biodata says, but I've come back. But when I spent those 4 years, I realized how much time and effort is spent on making every generation remember the Holocaust. It is an industry. It is an industry of memory. Because they feel it is important for the next Jewish generation to know what happened, so that it is never repeated again. I think our generations, no matter which community we belong to, also need to know how we reached our present stage in independent India, and what the previous generations went through. So that's that's one more reason for I thought that this needed to come out, so that at least your next generation reads something about what happened.
Absolutely, I completely agree. I'd just like to add a point, and perhaps you could comment on this, which is that certainly while people of the current generation, younger people of the current generation, may not be reading the original works in the original languages, what we're seeing is a lot of popular culture, like, Bollywood cinema, for instance, dealing increasingly with these themes, which used to be complete taboos in previous generations. Ironically, you had filmmakers like Yash Chopra who actually did see the partition firsthand, but who never made a film about it, a direct film dealing, explicitly with the violence, with the terrible things that happened. Today you have people making movies like Bhag Milkha Bhag, which really delve in a very sensitive way with what happened to a person and a family during that time, and how they, dealt with it. So I think it's a hopeful sign, and I think, books like these are very important. They only add to the awareness. So it's a very good thing. One question though about the translation. When you were translating from Punjabi into English, in flavor, these two languages are quite distinct. Punjabi has a beautiful, very rich, very earthy, very, and it's a very slow and soft, wide kind of flavor. English, and you've chosen the short story format, which needs to be quite, clipped and quite precise. How did you balance, between keeping the beauty of the language versus the necessity of English?
Well, that's the challenge of all translation. I think it's nothing unique to this book, but I think everywhere the translator has to decide where he lets, Amos Oz, the famous Israeli author, he once told me, I tell my translators, be unfaithful so you can be loyal. So sometimes you have to be unfaithful to the text, but loyal to the sense of what the author is trying to say. And every language has its own idiom and has its own requirements. And you can't really write Punjabi in English. I mean, you can, but that's not what my intention was. But so, you have to get what the tone, the mood, what he wants to say without going too much away from the text. So it's a delicate balancing exercise.